Hello, thanks for listening to the Freedom from Anger podcast. I'm joined today with Dr. Nicole Andreoli. Dr. Nicole is a licensed clinical psychologist in New York City. She works primarily from a cognitive behavioral framework. She has experience working with children, adolescents, and adults to address a wide range of social, emotional, and behavioral issues. She's also the author of a new book released June of this year, 2023. Mindfulness and the ADHD Parent, Cultivating Calm and Building Connection. Her book offers a holistic approach to parenting that provides readers with the tools they need to manage the challenges of raising a child with ADHD. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you get your books. And I'd like to welcome Dr. Nicole
Thanks so
today.
much for having me. I'm well.
About your book, what motivated you to write a book on ADHD and parenting?
So a lot of the work that I do in private practice is split between working with children and adults and families. And I spend a good portion of my week also doing the neuropsychological evaluations that diagnose ADHD. So kids and their parents come in, diagnose them with ADHD, and at the end of the testing process, we're talking about next steps, right? What do we need to put in place so that your child has the best outcomes? And we could talk about behavioral interventions and what they need to do at school, but almost always there's a gap where the parent is talking about how frustrating parenting can be. Now, parenting is frustrating regardless, but even more so when the child is displaying some of these classical ADHD symptoms, right? The forgetfulness, the procrastination, they're losing all of their homework. And this can make for a lot of chaos in the home, right? Mom and dad are screaming at their kids to get their homework done. Their kids and their siblings are now fighting over whatever. Now the kids and mom and dad are fighting. So the environment is so important to someone with ADHD that it's calm, it's consistent, that there's routine. But how do they get that when the environment typically now is filled with this kind of chaos and frustration? And why can't you just sit down and do your homework? So there really was a need for skills and strategies to help parents really be able to create a calm environment for their kids. And I felt like for a lot of my clients that I was working with, I was pulling resources from different places. Here's, a handout on mindfulness. Here's some ideas on how to create structured routine for your kids. Here's something for self-care on yourself. And then I figured this should all be available in one place. It would make it easier for parents to have the education behind it also, right? Here's why you need it. Here's why it would be helpful. And then here are worksheets, handouts, strategies, suggestions, all easy in one place. So that was kind of the motivation behind it.
Yeah, it's like dealing with people with substance abuse. I'm a licensed alcohol and drug counselor here in Tennessee, and I always try my best to reach out to the families and talk to them about like Al-Anon and things like
Mhm.
that, because you get somebody that's been an addict for years and years and years, and they get sober, you're dealing with an entirely different individual. You don't know really how to process that. So yes, that additional education that they can get to learn about the disease and
Mhm.
everything, it goes a long way, because often families think they're helping, but they're actually making things worse, because
Absolutely.
you can't shame somebody out of addiction, and it
Right.
just kind of spirals. So I definitely hear what you're saying about the giving the parents the tools to create that environment.
It's a good point too about the education. I hear this a lot, even with, anxiety or family members, friends supporting loved ones that have depression. They think that they're being encouraging, telling them, oh, why are you worried about that? There's nothing to worry about, or just snap out of it, thinking that they're being helpful. But it can be so dismissive, and it really could be so harmful. Because to your point, it can create a lot of shame around what is a very real either thought or feeling or fear to somebody else.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm a huge proponent of education. I think a lot of people have good intentions, but when they're not educated and they kind of can't go at it. And from my experience, it's just that constant shame that's poured upon them that they get kind of stuck right there in that rut. But being able to be open, and people are going to make mistakes. We're all human. But being able to be open and allow them to make those mistakes it's hard because you want the best for your family and friends, but you got to allow them to make those mistakes. And then hopefully when they decide to get better, then it's their choice and not
Right.
yours.
And there's so much misinformation out there about how to support someone or even what these difficulties and disorders look like, right? I think we've done a good job as a society of moving in a direction where we're normalizing mental health. But in some cases, I think access to too much information from so many different sources isn't always so helpful because not all of it is so accurate.
Oh, definitely. There's all kinds of information out there, but you really have to be.
To be selective.
Yeah, yeah. I was talking to somebody a while back, and I just asked. This individual was a professional journalist, been doing it for forever, and I asked him a simple question. I said, "What happened to journalism?" And he's like, "I don't know." I said, "It's amazing how many news stories where there'll be like misspellings in the title. Do you know how to spell check?" He had no words. He's like, "I don't know." It's just anybody that can type can pretty much be a journalist nowadays. But don't use spell check. It drives me up the wall. But yeah. So as far as ADHD, I'm sure everybody probably has a family member that suffers from ADHD. If you were to give one little bit of advice as far as knowing that someone has ADHD, what would we have to actually look for to kind of, I don't know, say diagnose, but kind of have an idea that, hey, this person might be suffering from this?
Well, I think that there are a couple of stereotypical symptoms that people look out for. And this is keeping in mind that there are a couple of subtypes of ADHD, right? You have the inattentive subtype, which is where you see children or adults who struggle paying attention, maybe struggle staying on task. I see these kids a lot in my office where mom and dad bring them in and they'll say things like, the teacher thinks that maybe they have ADHD, they're struggling to pay attention, but they can sit and play a video game for hours. They don't have any problems with attention. And I think that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions. When someone is interested in something, it's really easy to stay on task, right? It's really easy to focus when something is super interesting to you. Where you really see the difficulty is you're sitting in a boring history class or you're sitting in a really uninteresting work meeting. And that's where you really need to be able to engage parts of the brain, parts of your executive functioning system to pay attention, to stay engaged, to stay focused. And that's really where you start to see those difficulties. So it's things like difficulty sustaining attention, being easily distracted, maybe even difficulty organizing, struggling with directions, that kind of thing. The other subtype is hyperactivity and impulsiveness. And I think when people think of ADHD, this is kind of what they think of or what they picture. This is being really talkative or fidgety, difficulty staying on task, but more from like a behavioral perspective, right? They're jumping around, roughhousing, maybe interrupting a lot, blurting out a lot, not really being able to sit and wait your turn. A lot of times we describe these individuals as being driven by a motor or kind of always on the go. So those are some of the bigger symptoms that I think are pretty stereotypical for someone with ADHD.
Yeah, I can definitely see the video games because they might be able to sit there, but they're being stimulated like the entire time. And like you said, sitting in a boring history class, they're not really being stimulated. So that's when the mind kind of does what it wants and hard to pay attention. But yeah, I think typically when you think about somebody with ADHD is the hyperactive, bouncing off the walls type. Like I shared with you a little bit earlier, my wife suffers from ADHD and she's definitely the hyper type, and I can kind of pick up on that. But it's amazing what medication can do. And it's really hard. I'm pretty calm and try to have her like explain to me what's going on, and I can't wrap my mind around it. I couldn't imagine. I have some OCD tendencies, but
Mhm.
no hyperactivity or anything like
Right.
that. So when you have the parents in there, do you talk to the parents and the child, or do you do them separate?
Really depends. For the really young kids, mostly is just working with the parent, right? And offering the parent education, like we said, of course, and then strategies for how can they help out this child in the best way. As the kids get older, they often can have they also often can play more of a role in the treatment and the kind of strategies and interventions that work for them. And then of course when it's just adults, the adult is taking care of themselves. But after a certain point, it definitely is good to have the child to do one-on-one with the child and then either one-on-one with the parent or more of a family session. A lot of times with ADHD, there's comorbid disorders. So you start to see things like anxiety start to creep up. There's very high prevalency rates with things like anxiety and learning disorders. So it's nice to be able to talk to the child one on one to kind of see how they're doing, especially with ADHD. These kids, they learn that they're different from their peers. And I say that meaning different in the way that they see that maybe they're struggling or things feel a little harder for them or the teacher is more on top of them, redirecting them. And a lot of kids start to internalize that, right? Like, what's wrong with me? Why is everyone else sitting and I'm struggling to sit? And if they start to internalize that, it could really start to affect self-esteem and self-worth. And sometimes this is where you start to see things like where you start to see anxiety creep in. So part of treatment recommendations is making sure that we're tackling that early on so that that doesn't become kind of another obstacle that they are struggling with and another thing that they have to overcome.
Yeah, and I can definitely see from a young age if you have ADHD, you're looked at as different and your emotions are going to be different. Do you see a lot of people that have ADHD that really has anger issues because of their perceived being different?
Sure. And a lot of times, especially with anger, and this is probably something that you could really speak to, a lot of times when I see anger, especially in children, it's not just that they're angry, right? There's kind of something else that's coming along with it. And sometimes the anger is how they're expressing anxiety or sadness or some kind of shame. So usually when we're trying to tackle the anger, I'm trying to figure out what else is going on that's kind of right secondary to this.
Oh yeah, it's the whole iceberg.
Mhm.
What's below the surface. Anger is what we see and we can experience, but what's actually causing the anger in the first place. And I'm sure that a lot of people, and they like to call it anger management, prefer emotion management.
Mhm.
Because if you can manage anger, that's the strongest emotion, then you can manage everything else. And I think everybody could benefit from that. But people with ADHD, I can definitely see where the anxiety, the frustration, and I've seen a lot with substance abuse.
Sure.
Usually, when I find that somebody's primary drug of choice is marijuana, I'll ask them, okay, well, have you ever been diagnosed with anything? They're like, oh, well, ADHD.
Mhm.
Okay, so you're self-medicating
Yep.
because it calms you down, but you
Mhm.
don't want to take the ADHD medication to
It's a
calm you
very,
down. Yeah.
very common question. Mhm.
Yep. Yeah. So I definitely have seen that 1,000 times. It's
Mhm.
like automatic. You like marijuana? It calms you down. Have you been diagnosed? ADHD? Yeah, I got
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, children with ADHD have the stats are very high for them kind of going on and abusing substances and for a number of reasons. If you're thinking about children that have the hyperactive subtype, they tend to be hyperactive, they tend to be impulsive, and that impulsivity as they get into their teen years and older can kind of translate into risk-taking behaviors, right? Substance abuse, lying, stealing, those types of things. And I really stress to the parents about the active role that they play in supporting the children and, like I said, trying to provide this kind of calm, supportive environment, because that becomes a protective factor. Children who have supportive parents tend to have lower rates of those risk-taking behaviors like substance abuse. And then, of course, if they're not treating the ADHD, it does become a coping mechanism, to your point.
Yeah. A lot of people fall in that self-medicating category. A lot of them don't know they're self-medicating, but they definitely are. Something that's always, I don't know, it's always kind of, and I'm sure I'm totally wrong about this, but I've always wondered because I grew up in a time where the internet didn't exist.
Mhm.
So now you have kids that this is all they know, and my wife's nephew is constantly has a screen in front of his face, and he's young and he's hyper. Is it could there be something to the constant stimulation, like 24/7 nonstops in the developing brain that might cause somebody to have ADHD, or is it just a crazy, crazy thought on my part?
I mean, it's definitely not a crazy thought. There's some research, especially in babies, like really early on, that say that exposure to screen time before the age of 2 could lead to problems with attention later on. And I think a lot of these studies are conflicting and maybe a little inconclusive, but there is some thought that there's a certain type of activity on screen, like when the cartoons like flash really, really quickly, they change scenes very, very quickly, that is making some sort of damage to the brain that's making the child more susceptible to problems with inattention. That's not necessarily a conclusive thought, right? It's the some people will argue that there's not a causality there, that it's just one factor, and that there are plenty of kids who watch plenty of TV and go on to not have any problems. So the way that I think the best way to kind of answer this is thinking about ADHD as being, it's a very complex disorder, right? There's a combination of factors that go on to determine if someone develops ADHD. And that's going to have a lot to do with their genes, their environment, and things that are happening at a neurological level. If kids are watching a lot of TV with no other stimulation, yeah, it might lead to problems, ADHD being one of them, especially in someone who's predisposed. But I don't think at this point anyone can say conclusively, if you watch too much TV, you're going to go on to develop ADHD.
Yeah. Once we've had time to do the research and do the studies, and to me, I'm amazed at just in the past 20 years, the things that we're able to do with the brain and how we're able to look at it. And I'm really curious to see, hopefully we're around in 20 years to see, looking back, go, okay, well, maybe that wasn't the greatest idea to hand a kid a tablet and say, hey, watch this. It's your babysitter.
Right? Everything's online.
Yeah, yeah.
Everything's on the screen.
Yeah, I did a podcast as a while back, and we mainly just talked about just the benefits of just unplugging,
Hmm.
the benefits of being with self. It's a whole mindfulness, being present. And I think for a lot of people, it's such a foreign idea.
Hmm.
And I tell a lot of people, I know things are hectic. I know that the house is crazy. I don't care if you got to lock yourself in a closet. Just find a few minutes just to be with your own thoughts and just unplug, no screens, no nothing, just whatever you have to do.
Yeah, there's benefits to it. It's hard because everything we do now is behind a screen. We with everything we do for work is on a screen. Even a lot of our social stuff has become on the screen. How we connect through social media, what we do for entertainment and hobbies is all on a screen. But the downsides of that is, what are we missing by not looking up?
Yeah, yeah. Something as simple as going outside, taking a walk, go to a park. Never been to New York. That's where you're stationed, but my wife has several times, and she has nothing but great things to say about it. And from what I hear, Central Park is amazing.
Hmm. It is. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and but yeah, just getting out into nature and just having that time. I know growing up here in the South, everybody's well, it's kind of dying down a little bit, but like hunting and stuff like that. And I did it for a few years, and it really kind of dawned on me as I grew older. looking back, why are these grown men going out in the woods by themselves early in the morning? It's freezing cold. And looking back, well, that's probably the only time that they had to themselves. They had time to sit there. And 9 times out of 10, you're not shooting anything. You're just sitting there and you're dealing with the elements. So I think there's a lot to be said having that alone time.
Sure.
And what is it? A lot of people that I work with, they're just like, oh, I'm not going to deal with anybody. I'm just going to be alone. And they go down that train of just having nothing to do with anybody.
Right. Well, avoidance and isolating is different
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
unhealthy.
Yeah. And I tell them about this quote that Aristotle said 2,000 plus years ago. He said, a man that live in complete isolation is either a wild beast or a god. I said, anybody here is a god. I don't see anybody with a tail. We are social creatures where we have to deal with that. And when you deal with addiction, the isolation is part of it because that becomes your primary relationship is to the addiction.
Absolutely.
And then it's actually a chemical reaction in the brain to isolate. But yeah, anyway, back to ADHD. I get rolling on substance abuse for a while. So if I have a child and I know they're struggling, I'm pretty darn sure they have ADHD, but I'm not going to give them medication. What's something that I could do to try to assist them without the use of medication?
Well, I think that there are a couple of things. First and foremost, if you suspect that even for yourself, that your child or yourself does have ADHD, I really strongly recommend, if possible, getting an evaluation by a mental health professional, going through the full psychological battery. It's a lot in terms of time and energy, but it's really going to give you the best assessment of your current level of functioning. And if you meet criteria, and also what specific areas are really affected by the ADHD and what would you benefit the most from. So that is first and foremost. Medication is only one piece of the puzzle here. And not everyone is open to medication and or ready for it. Outside of that, there's a couple of things. For school-age children, through teens, through college, educational accommodations, whatever that looks like, depending on the child's needs, is really important for the best outcomes. Kids are in school to learn, and they can learn and be very successful with ADHD. They just might need a little bit of help or support or a different approach. And every person's needs are different, but things like extended time can be really helpful. Some students get, assistance with note taking or outlines before class, depending on their specific needs. So really taking a look at where they're struggling and what they would benefit the most from at school is really helpful. At home, we're looking for structure, we're looking for routine, we're looking for, a heads up about transitions coming. These are things that will help the child be successful throughout the day and help minimize chaos and conflict. So those calendars on the wall that say, these are the 4 things we have to do every morning can be really helpful. Reminders that, hey, we're leaving for school in 10 minutes, we're leaving for school in 5 minutes can be really helpful so that they know it's coming and to help with the transition. Beyond that, I think what's really important for kids and families, even without ADHD, there's lots of conflict, there's lots of chaos at home with family life, right? Kids are constantly being told what to do, how to do it, and when to do it. You really want to make sure that you're balancing that out with positive family time. So what can you do with your child to make sure that there's positive communication? Not just giving them advice and solving their problems, but being a support, asking how their day was and acknowledging that that was a really hard day. Being supportive and validating their experiences is really important for good communication and for the child to really feel heard. Saying things like, that sounds really hard, I also would have been really upset, can really go a long way. Making sure that you're spending quality time together. Doesn't matter what you're doing. You could be playing a video game, reading a story, painting nails, going for a walk, but where there's positive interactions. so that it's not just the child being told, take your bath, eat your vegetables, do your homework, go to bed. It's really important that there's a good balance of that. And I think that that really gets lost in, it's absolute chaos in the day to day. A lot of families are just in survival, trying to get to work and school on time, get all the chores done. It's a lot. And a lot of that gets thrown to the wayside. And it's so important to make sure that that is a big part of daily life.
Yeah, I'm a huge proponent of structure. Even a lot of people that I work with, they could have been homeless for 10 years, but once they get a dose of structure, then they cling to it. And if you disrupt that structure, then they get agitated. But
Hmm.
I think having that structure is beneficial for everyone. We're creatures of habit. We like the structure. We like to know what's going on because that makes us feel safe.
Absolutely.
But life's life and stuff happens. And when that structure gets tilted, then we kind of go off the rails. So it's good to prepare for those things. And example that I always use is that we are human. We are going to die one day. We have loved ones that are going to pass. My he just turned 87. And I use him as an example. I was like, is it rational for me to think that he's going to live another 20 years? No.
Hmm.
But even now, like looking to that day, I'm not going to be prepared. It's going to hurt, but
Sure.
I can go ahead and start educating myself to prepare for that. And I think that's what a lot of us, what we need to do is really educate ourselves to prepare for those hard times because
Hmm.
they're going to happen. Somebody's going to piss you off at work, this, that, and other. But like you said about the household, a lot of us, we're just trying to make it, and we bring a lot of that stuff home, and we ignore the children, and we're not our best versions of ourselves. So if we're dealing with a child that's ADHD, their needs are not going to be met dealing with all that. So
Right.
I think what you're doing, trying to talk to the parents, that's huge. And that's going to help, the teachers at school. It's going to help the society as a whole, but it's at home time.
Yeah. And it helps, it's not just the child, families where there's a child that has an ADHD diagnosis, and I don't know the statistic offhand, but there's a much higher divorce rate in families with children that have an ADHD diagnosis. It just adds a layer of difficulty. And so being able to provide the support that these kids really need to thrive is so important. And I think to your point, part of that also is teaching coping skills. The emotional regulation is a struggle for children and even adults with ADHD. So learning how to cope with anger, with sadness, with anxiety, with stress, with uncertainty is so important. And that's a lifelong skill. So parents modeling it, talking about it, teaching this strategy is really important.
Yeah, communication's everything. Tell people I work with, there's more emotions than happy, mad, and sad. There's a whole
It's so
gambit of
true.
different emotions. So let's dig a little deeper. Okay, well, I'm angry. Well, okay, well, why are you angry? Frustrated. Okay, why are you frustrated? Try to hammer it down to, okay, this is the root cause. Okay, so how can we avoid that next time? But yeah, coping skills. It's amazing. Oh, Lord, how many people that I've had be like, man, I wish I would have known this sooner. I wish I'd been taught some of these things sooner. Because a lot of times, once they get to me, they've been incarcerated. For the majority of people, the most basic stuff was not taught to them
Mhm.
because they didn't have the supportive family and just the idea of someone else cannot make you angry. Someone else cannot do this, do this, do this. Blows their mind
Right.
because in their environment, well, so and so said this, it made me angry. Well, so and so just said that. How you choose to react rather than respond, that's on you. Like there's
Mhm.
choice.
Right.
The idea of choice is just so foreign to them, and they're like, "Man, I wish I was taught this stuff earlier in life." And I think this stuff should be taught in schools from a young age.
Absolutely.
But we won't go into all that. But yeah, I think education's huge. I definitely try to get my clients to read more rather than watch stuff on TV, even if it's just an audiobook, because everybody has those 2 or 3 books that just changes their life, changes their mind, and it's just been sitting there forever. And then once you pick it up and read it, I love one book that I definitely promote, and I like it because it's simplistic, 7 chapters, easy to read, and he repeats himself quite a bit. But it's The Four Agreements.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. I've seen
yeah,
that.
yeah. And it came out in the late 90s, and it sold millions and millions of copies. And how I came about it was my supervisor at the time, she had The Four Agreements posted on her wall. It was like a
Mm.
little laminated thing, and I asked her, "What is that?" She said, "Oh, it's from a book." So, "Oh, you should read it." And I read it, and I was like, "Okay, we were taught all these 4 things as children, and he's coming from it from a different approach, from it's passed down through generations, and these 4 things, if you can apply these 4 things, it'll change your life." And I must say, for me personally, I've read that book no telling how many times, and I've made people read it several
Mhm.
times. And it's just simple stuff like don't take anything personal, always do your best, don't make assumptions, be impeccable with your word. And those are all things that we're taught as children, sticks and stones may break my bones.
Mhm.
Don't take anything personal. Always do your best. Don't make assumptions. What's the old assumptions make a ass out of you and me? But yeah, we're taught all these basic things. We don't put them into play. And I highly recommend checking that book out. And I've gotten really good results from my clients who took the time to actually read it and to actually try to apply some of those basic things. Because when you think about it, if you're the type that takes everything personal, then you're living a nightmare. I mean, every waking moment of your life is just a nightmare. There's only a few people in this world whose opinions I really care about.
Mhm.
And so I can count them on one hand, and I'll have fingers left over. Everybody else, they're entitled to their opinion about me and whatever. Hey, good on you. But in reality, there's only a very few select people whose opinions about me that really affect me. So when you get somebody that comes in and you determine, okay, well, they're definitely suffering from ADHD, you've talked to the parents, what comes next? I brought my kid to the office.
Mhm.
Now I got this information. As a parent, what do I do? What are the first things I need to do?
Well, like we said, you're gonna involve the school. You're gonna put some of these strategies into place to help create routine and structure and have the day go in a way that there are minimal surprises to the child, right? They know it's coming. They know they do these 3 things in the morning. They know this is what happens after pick up from school. And then, from there, I think it's a little bit more of a unique, tailored approach. Are we adding in therapy to help work on specific behaviors or to work on any emotional difficulties? It might be a little bit of a trial and error to get the correct mix of supports together. Is there a tutor that we have to involve? Is there family therapy that has to be a component of it? But I think first and foremost is setting the kid up to be supported and successful academic and putting some of those routines in place at home. And then from there, it's really very unique to the child. What does the child need? What are the additional obstacles that this family is facing?
I could definitely see there be some tension
Hmm.
if you're in a household with other kids. Like, well, hey, how come Susie's getting all this attention and all this
Hmm.
extra effort? Then do you think that's when it would be beneficial for that communication between the family?
Oh,
Not necessarily.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's research that shows that the siblings of children with ADHD are just as much affected, from an emotional perspective. sometimes those children feel an added pressure to behave, right? To be the good one. The family's out at a restaurant, the sibling that has the ADHD diagnosis maybe struggles to sit down. Maybe they're, constantly out of their chair, away from the table, running around the restaurant, constantly being, yelled at and corrected. And the sibling feels like their role in the family has become they're the behaved one, they're the good one. And that could be a lot of pressure and can lead to resentment, can lead to their own buildup of negative emotions and anger and those kinds of things. So it really is, it's the whole family dynamic that's affected, and it's the whole family dynamic that has to be involved in next steps and treatment.
Yeah. I hate to throw out a generalization, but I think ADHD is compared to 30 years ago, it's pretty commonplace. Most people understand what it is. And I think the younger generations, they're probably sitting in class with 20 people that have ADHD.
Mm.
So I think they're a little bit more apt at dealing with somebody with ADHD. But if you look back 25, 30 years ago, there's just one kid bouncing off the walls and like, yeah, don't want to deal with that. And then you get angry at them for just being themselves. They can't help it. But now I think it seems to be more commonplace, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
And with that being said, do you think that there's been an increase in ADHD?
Mhm.
So do you think possibly, I said I don't want to offend anybody, but do you think it's overdiagnosed more now than it was, say, 25 years ago, 30 years ago?
Well, I definitely agree that it's diagnosed more than it was in the past. And I think a lot of people take that prevalency, that change in prevalency, as an indication that it's overdiagnosed. But I don't know if, as a rule, that is what that means. There definitely is a rise in cases and diagnoses, but a lot of that is due to increased awareness. I think the mental health field, American Psychological Association, American Psychiatric Association, has gotten better or like more improved diagnostic criteria. And I think our understanding of the disorder, the way that it's measured and evaluated for, has changed. So we've gotten smarter at what we're looking for and how we're looking for it, which would, of course, lead to an increase in cases. I think there's also better access to healthcare. There's lots of struggles with that too, but more people are able to access mental health care. And there's also been a lot more available knowledge about ADHD, and it's become a lot less stigmatizing than it has in the past. So all of those reasons are definitely contributing to the higher prevalency rate. I don't know if that necessarily is what makes it like overdiagnosed. So, are there people that are maybe being misdiagnosed or are getting access to treatment or medications that maybe shouldn't, and that's, kind of falsely inflating that number? Sure. But I definitely think that there's some real reason that we can point to for why we're seeing such a higher rate of it now than we have in the past.
Yeah. I mean, I've known individuals who would act ADHD just to get the medication because
Mhm.
they like the medication. They get
Yeah.
buzzed or high.
It is a highly abused drug. There are a number of people that seek it out because it is stimulating even without the diagnosis.
Yeah. I actually use Adderall as an example with my clients. You talk about the brain chemistry. I said, we're walking chemistry sets. Everybody's chemistry is different.
Mm.
Some people need additional stuff to make everything work right. Look at something like Adderall. Somebody that actually has ADHD takes it, calms them down. But if you don't and you take it, what happens? The opposite. You're
Mm.
amped up, you're awake, you're alert, and you're moving.
Right.
This shows you how everybody's chemistry is different. So your book just came out a couple months ago. So what kind of feedback have you been getting? Not necessarily sales, but has anybody reached out to you, said, hey, thanks? A lot of authors that they'll get personal letters.
Yeah, it's still new. It came out exactly 2 months to the day, so still kind of fresh out there in its infancy stages of publication, but I've gotten some feedback that people have found certain exercises in the book to be particularly helpful, or, understanding things in a new way, kind of shedding new light on the way that they're looking at either their child or ADHD as a whole. So yeah, definitely starting to get some positive feedback, which is really exciting.
Oh, I can only imagine. I think, what's the statistic? I think like 80% of people think they have a book in them, but only like 10% do, or something like
I've
that.
never seen that.
Yeah, but it's great that you gotten it out there. I'm sure that as soon as people find out that it's out there, it's
Mhm.
definitely gonna catch on, because I mean, there's so many parents struggling with this. I know I'm certainly gonna share it and put it out there, and I know some people in my personal life that could definitely benefit from this, because a child with ADHD, it does bring a different dynamic into the household, struggles, and unfortunately, a lot of times it's, how can I just keep them stimulated so they're not causing a fuss, and
Mhm.
then you get that disconnect.
Absolutely.
I'm looking forward to getting a copy of it myself, going through it, and it'll help me in my personal life, and I can pass
Yeah.
on the information to other
Thank you
people.
so much. I appreciate it.
Well, Dr. Nicole, it was great having you on here. I could definitely go in 10 different directions, but I'm sure you got things to do. And I think everything that you said today is definitely going to help some people, and hopefully they listen.
Good. I'm glad. I hope so. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. That was our interview with Dr. Nicole Andreoli. Hopefully you enjoyed it and learned something about ADHD. Please check out her new book, Mindfulness and the ADHD Parent, available on Amazon, other bookstores. I'll put the Amazon link in the description. If you'd like any of our services, please visit our website, freedomanger.com. We have a whole list of various behavioral health education classes. Just contact me through email. If you have any topics, or if you know of any guests that would be a good fit for the podcast, please let me know. And until next time, as always, stay safe.